Hello, welcome back. This is Bald Guy with a Beard, episode 5 of building a World Cup-esque tournament site. I'm going to sidestep in this episode just a little bit. Instead of moving really forward on the application, I want to discuss something that was implemented yesterday, which is useMemo. React is an interesting technology because not only do you have to justify using or not using something, in the future, any change you make can definitely break things within the current component, and we don't want that to happen. So I wanted to discuss some of the scenarios of useMemo with you here. So we obviously in yesterday's episode or the episode before, whenever you happen to watch it, we justified using memo because we don't want to recalculate all the standings again, and that makes complete sense, right? We don't want to go through and have to calculate for 48 teams all the calculations. So what this essentially does to review is this says only calculate the standings once unless the groups change, which makes sense, and this is its dependency, right? Unless the groups change, and only do it then. Well, what useMemo is actually protecting against is your component can re-render for many different reasons, right? Including a state change, your parent component changes, the context, which we haven't gotten into yet, a context above it changes, or something like this. So what we want to ensure is that it actually does only execute when groups change. And so I'll give you an example first of why we implemented this versus just leaving this like this, where we have standings just equals this call. So let me undo that. So inside here, I'm going to create an input, and its type is going to be we'll do a checkbox, right? And I'll close this off, and I'll just call this toggle and toggle mode, right? So let's imagine you've been given a task of changing the style on this screen, and we're not going to do that, but this will just give you the example of the wire up to do that, right? So you've been tasked with changing this from light mode, like we have currently, to dark mode. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to respond to obviously an onChange event, right? And we're going to pass in the argument E, and we're going to say, okay, we want to set whether this is checked or not. So we're going to say set is checked. Now this doesn't exist yet, right? And then we're going to pass in e.target, which is the target item being passed in, and checked, I think. Yeah. Okay. So now we have this sort of input of type checkbox here. Let me see if this shows up. So you can see over here we have a toggle mode, and there's a checkbox here now. What I need to do is I want to create another hook, which is a useState hook. And what this is going to do is when this changes, this actually creates a side effect, which is the re-rendering of this component. So we're going to default it to false, and we're going to call this is checked, and then have its accompanying function to set is checked, like we named it below, right? So there we go. So now we have this all wired up. Now, what I want to do here is I'm gonna write a console.log in here that says executing get standings, right? Makes sense. Oh, and I've got to actually incorporate or import this useState here. So I think now we've eliminated all the errors. Yeah. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to open up the dev tools here. Did I do that? There we go. So the dev tools are here. What do I have here? useState. Let's clear this, refresh, and see what it comes up with. Oh, I didn't add the keys to this. Let me do that real quick so we can eliminate that from this. React requires you to have a key when you're writing out things in a loop like that because it's how it identifies the state of it. And we'll get more into the virtual DOM and all that kind of stuff later, but when it comes up. But this would be group.id. So hopefully that will at least clear one of these. I think we have one in a child component as well. So we're going to refresh this. Yeah, so we eliminated one of them, so that cleaned that up. Anyway, so back to this again. We're going to, so what we want to do is we're going to click and see if it, so this is going to create a re-render. So if we click on this, it's going to set is check to a different value, either true or false. Since this is a state thing, it tells React, hey, we need a re-render on this. Now, when this re-renders, if this were an ordinary function without useMemo, this would execute every single time. So hopefully what's going to happen is we're not going to see this because it's only going to have executed once and not executed again. So if I go like this, so you can see it's not doing anything. I'll have to look into, I don't know what that is, but you can see it didn't execute it at all. Whereas if we remove this, and let's say we move this into calc standings, right? So that's what it's going to be called. If I there we go. So I'm going to put it in the calc standings function, and then I'm going to remove the useMemo from here stuff, right? And I'm just going to here. So what this is essentially doing is saying constant standings equals calc all standings, right? So save this. And you can see already here, I'm going to clear this, but see, it's executing. Now you'll notice it's executing twice, and that's a Vite thing in dev mode when you're using, well, actually, I shouldn't say dev mode, when you're using strict mode, and I can get into that later, but you'll see double executions like this, and that's not a bug. So yeah, so you can see it executes and it's going and getting standings every time. And then when we remove this, oops, and put it back to its original state here, and I'll even take this out because we have it already in calc standings, right? And I clear this and refresh. You'll notice it doesn't happen anymore. So that's justification for having useMemo. Now, another way we can break this, and this is a common thing that happens in here, is this. Someone comes in later and we say for some reason we only want to use a certain filtering of these groups, right? So we say, okay, groups dot filter, and we'll say we only want to filter ones, just for an example, that have in their name includes the letter A or A. Okay. So let's say we do this, and person comes in and says, okay, I'm gonna use, we're only gonna change when these filtered groups change, right? This is also actually going to destroy this useMemo. And the reason is, no matter what you pass in, even if the groups don't change, it is actually going to execute this useMemo every single time. And the reason why is this creates a completely new object every time. And what this is checking against is the actual in-memory location of the object. So if you do this before that, you're going to break this memo, and it's actually going to execute every single time that this gets re-rendered. And so that's one way that you can very commonly break this useMemo, and it's happened, and it's done a lot without people knowing it. Okay, so Now in the browser, I want to show you actually this failing with this example. So I'm going to step over here and I'm going to click. Let me clear this first. And you can see it's executing twice, even beyond what the Vite strict mode what the Vite strict mode does. It's executing more than once. So how we can fix this is we can also, I'm going to close this. We can also use memo on this filter. So if we use memo here and we create a function out of this and we slide over here and we say, okay, execute this and then provide the groups here as a dependency, right? And then finish it off like that. What did I do wrong? Oh, this should be on the outside there, I think. Yeah. So there we go. And then this, and then so we make sure I put it right. So we filter this on the groups and then we filter this on the filtered groups. So let's save that off and let's clear this and let's now do this. And you can see that that's no longer toggling in that way. So me reviewing this and doing these things is there's no way to suggest that this should be used all the time for any value you need to create, right? Um, there's if it's a very, you have to actually really justify it, and it has to be a large amount of, the first pass is actually, it has to be a complicated grouping of calculations that you just don't want to redo it every time. And a lot of times you want to justify it. You want to make sure that it's doing something to the UI, like creating a flicker or something like that you don't want the user to see. But again, use this select. It's very useful when it can be used. Make sure you protect it correctly. So this review I kind of went over useMemo is not to suggest that anytime you have to recalculate a value or a set of values on a component that it should absolutely be done with useMemo. It's you should scrutinize whenever you're going to add complexity to any component in React, and you should actually have to justify it because it does add complexity, and it does for future development add thinking, in-depth thinking about how you want to implement something. So it will add time, absolutely. So now I'm satisfied with the little useMemo review. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to just briefly looking at rules, and hopefully I can keep this to 15 minutes total. We'll just do a quick 5-minute review on the rules that we're going to apply that relate to inputs to calculating the standings. Okay, so now I just want to discuss briefly about what we're going to do in the next episode, which is the discussion of rules and what I mean by them. So I'm going to step over to the calc standings util because we've done some calculations here. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually add a new file. I'm going to bring in rules.json that we're actually going to use, and they'll be available below as well in the next episode. And I'm going to copy this over so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here, because it can be a little complicated and confusing when I'm just speaking on code. This might make more sense, right? So with any tournament, there are rules around how the teams stand in them. So this is the most common for soccer, right? Which is points. You get 3 points for a win, generally 1 point for a draw, and 0 points for a loss. That's usually the first tiebreaker. The one who wins and gets the most points, potentially draws, is higher up. Makes sense. Then there's secondary and tertiary and on and on and on tiebreakers that also have an impact very frequently. So if teams are even in points, then it might go by goal differential, right? And that's common. And I think that's the World Cup rule too. And if it's tied there, then it goes goals scored and then head-to-head points and on and on and on. Now, this can get very complicated because you can end up with two-way or three-way ties where people use head-to-head as a higher up priority to determine or factor into what a team's standing is. So that's what I'm referring to when I refer to rules. And we're going to implement those. And I want to implement sort of a drag and drop operation that allows the user to determine what is the most important rules. And then on some of these types of rules, have inputs into them. And I'll give you an example. So like some tournaments for wins, they provide 3 points. Let's go down here to where we've actually hard coded these rules, and this is what would need to change in this case for this particular rule. But um, some I have it hard coded here for 3. My daughter's played in tournaments where they gave 5 points for a win. Been in situations before where the goal differential in a game, even if you won 8-0, it gets cut off at 5-0 for competitiveness. And so you don't get credit for +8 if you beat a team 8-0. You get credit only up to 5, so it's only +5 there. So there's rules like that need to be applied. And so obviously within this calc standings, which its job is going to remain only solely to calculate whatever is there and provide the line items for each team. The sorting and determining of what the actual ordering of the standings will be done by something else. If that makes sense. So yeah, so that's what I'm referring to in the next episode, and we're gonna get into cleaning this up so that it can take in variables of points and wherever else. I've got to review this completely to make sure that I'm covering for each of the rules. But we're going to have essentially inputs into this that will allow us to dynamically generate what the line items totals should be for teams, and then we'll have a separate function or suite of functions that determine, okay, what's the actual pecking order for these teams in that grouping. All right. So I hope I didn't confuse you. I tend to get very verbose at times, so I appreciate it. At least we kept this to a rough, in the teens number of minutes video. I appreciate you following along, and I will see you in episode 6, where we go through the beginning implementation of rules for setting the standings. Thanks again. Appreciate it.